ô vel mun tuam te ka iong ka khom chiang ni kha lu lut huai ma
I've known Brother Benson for a long time.
Now pa Benson kha hun sot pia ki pan ka thei ta
I remember when his daughter was born, actually,
atanu apian lai ka thea
and I met Brother Kong
now pa thang ka hon thea
and got to know the brethren here and up in Shillong.
hiya unau te le unau silong au te bang leng ka thea
And then, of course, I work with these fellows here every year.
kum te nga hiya ong pai gi ge unau te to na ka sem ko mua
You get to know someone a lot differently when you live with them for about a month.
kha khat bang na hungom khom chiang na mi na thei dan sang na thei dan hong tu ma ge nga
So it's interesting when those three worlds come together and you see your friends that you work with and then two of the Indian brethren you work with.
Na lom te na sep khom te le India unau te to ichia yong ki suk tu chiang ina
But now we have Aaron and Carly here.
wai bana aron to karli hiai mu na hongom layu
And so it's like looking out and seeing four different worlds colliding together.
Hoveli hong ki suk tu bang ka sa he
But that's the church.
himale hiai chu sak tuam din munai
And wherever you go in the world, you meet so many people that have the same goals in life.
Hovel mun tu mai pai chiang ina ei ma bangagin na nei le pathian bia kham dinga oma
And although we didn't understand everything that you said in your worship service, we knew exactly what you were saying.
ya na hong gen chia biak na thu gen teu na thu ma lo te hu thei ke ma le na thil hu le na gen teu ka thei thei wai
And you just see how small and how large the church is and how small the world is when you come together.
sap tuam alet dal le hovel aneu dan kha ya ki pani na mu ai
It seems like it was 4 years ago that we met 3 weeks ago.
Kumli paisa te kha kalthum paisa ikimu abanga
It was just 3 weeks ago, I guess it was, when we were here.
kalthum paisa ina hiya ka omwa
But we've seen a lot of preachers, heard a lot of great lessons from my friends here, and be able to get reacquainted with a lot of the brethren here in India.
Preacher tuam te mun tuam ma mui na wai ba na hiya ka sep te wa ki pana sil lai te ngai ki na ichina thil tam pi kha ka zil be wa hi
So we're almost ready to go home.
wai zia ka ilam pa ding ki man ta ka hi
But it's always great to be able to worship with our brethren in different cultures.
Tôn dan tuam u nam te to pathian biak khom kha nuam ka sama ai
I appreciate the scripture that was read.
yai mu na bible tang kisim kha ka pak tama ma
We are going to talk about Gideon this morning.
tu jing kalina Gideon to ki sai khai gen dinga
And the title of the lesson is Three Things That Gideon Heard God Say.
tua itu piding tu Gideon ina pathian tu gen tiltum azak te chipan sanna igen dinga hi
The children of Israel, if you know the history, they have come out of Egypt because they were God's chosen people.
atang thui thei sai hiya Israel te ka ai gupta a kipanina pathian mi ani zia kuna aun pot kiawa
They came to the land of their promised land, but because of their lack of faith, they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years.
Gam chiam zuana hung pa hi wa hi malegin na atak sabjia kuna gam dai a hung wang wai wa
And then they came back up to Kadesh Barnea before they went into the land of Canaan.
kanan alu mauna kades barnia a hung tungki nonwa
And God's messenger approached Joshua and the men of Israel.
a huchi hunina pathian thu potui na Joshua ahong na ya.
There was a re-purification of themselves and all of the jubilee that was associated with going in and conquering the land.
Huchi na amite ki siang thong thak ding le wai gam chia ma alu thik na ding wa til tuam tom ki siang ahon.
But before Joshua dies, God warns the people that you haven't gotten all of the influences out of the promised land.
Himale Joshua si mai na pathia ni na wai gam chia ma na lu na ten wa na kim na kiang wa te hon ne na khana subbe ding wa hia chia.
But what God allowed his people to do when they came into the promised land is they were able to completely take the land without fighting.
Himale pathianin amawa panpina aphalai le wai gam chia ma hong tung chia na gal do se lo ba wai hi zo ma ya wa the ding na
There's a few battles that were recorded, like the Battle of Jericho.
Kido na Jericho kwalak na kha tam lo bang za hiam chu imua.
But for the most part, God's messenger said, you were giving this land without fighting.
Himale hun tam zwa kha pathian mi te na ge nu tu yai gam kha do se ngai lo pathian na hon.
You entered into houses that were already furnished, and you entered into fields that had already been plowed and had fruit.
Huchi na in bol sa te hoi te ka om sa te na bolwa ding wa wai bana huan hai bol sa aga ching sa te ka na bolwa ding.
So when the children of Israel came in, they just came in and took over this land, and then they were happy.
Huchi na wai om sa teng Israel te hong lu ta hong lu a hit man na lu ma sama.
But he warned, if you do not get the inhabitants out of the land, they will influence you away from me.
Himale pathianin amaw anavaw ko na tu yai gama omite na subbe kiule amaw na the kalo hun thuzo di wai.
Here in Joshua 6, it's been 150 years since they have come into the land.
Yai aka yai tanaka wai gam chia ma hong tung nunu kum zale songa apai hinta
And as we just read, it is not the scene as it was in the time of Joshua.
Himale yai huna hong ko saktan na Joshua huna ako saktan untuk akibang non.
As the children of Israel were able to come into these cities and just take them over and take over the commerce and all the marketplaces and the schools, it's a lot different scene now.
Himale Joshua huna hong paya huai market le tuam om sa te hong lak hunu hinol lovina tu huna ako sakna din mo.
It said the because of the Midianites and they had come up, the children of Israel are hiding in caves.
Huchi na Midian te ziakina lau mama Israel te kakibumang din mo ni na om ahi.
They came up in numbers that were more than the locusts. They couldn't even number all of them.
Huchi na huai Midian te tu khau pe pa nga sim te walo ata matamina amaw laka ahumwa.
It's been 150 years and all of these enemies were able to take all of their livestock.
Huchi na hiyay kumzale som na nungina ame mate teng ane le alam te teng alam.
The children of Israel, when they planted crops, they got some before the enemy came, but the enemy came and burned it all.
Huchi na Israel te lual hai abor tiang muna ame mate hong pai matong chiklamani na ahun tamzo ame mate.
It said that they came as far as Gaza. That's very south in the promised land.
Yaya I Bible tang sim nai le Gaza a kipan le hong pai uchi wai ka sim lama kipan Gaza kichi amau te na pan mun gam lap.
And where Gideon is, it's up in the north.
Huchi na Gideon kosak na tu malam gam lapia o mahia.
And that's the scene that we see of Gideon when the story opens.
Yai itang tu sim na ka huai tok kisai ahi.
At the very end, the last verse that we read in verse 6.
Bunguk tam guk na isim na
This is what God is always waiting for.
yai makapatianin ananga iti ahi.
It got to the point where the children of Israel cried out to the Lord and said, we need your help.
Patianin ananga la mama tu Israel te kapanahon pan poi mo kahin chika patianin ananga.
You may remember in Exodus, the first and the second chapter, the children of Israel were in captivity in Egypt for 400 years.
Yaya Exodus bungkal le bung ni ai theng sai hiya Israel te kha kumzam li kha chuak le salam bolin
And it
an
wasn't until they cried out to the Lord that the Lord went and got Moses to come be their deliverer.
Puchia pathian kyang ahong ka hiat mau kha pathian ni na mosi zangin api ke ya.
So we're going to look at Gideon, not in detail. I just want to look at 3 things that really impacted his life.
Ya ya Gideon to kisai ending a sau pin atang tu en ke ding a mele thil thum ama hi wa het khama ma tunin eleni chiai.
The first time we see him is starting in verse 11.
Ama sapena yet di tu vai ho mi te bung tam so
It said the angel of the Lord came to him.
Puchina pathian angela kyang ahong kilaka.
And the first thing that I believe impacted him, the Lord said in verse 12, the Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor.
Ya ya amma hin kwa sukama ma ka te tu tam som le nia nang mi hak hang san na kyanga to pa o ma hi chang tu gen ta hin kwa ka ma mai.
Gideon didn't see himself as a man of valor.
Gideon ka ama ki mu dana mi hak hang sana ki mu lo
He was threshing wheat in a wine press.
Ya ya ka aman ka bu chila wine bola o ma hiya.
So he was threshing wheat in a place to where he needed a lot of wind to blow the chaff away, but it was down inside of a wine press.
Ya ya bu se ka om na ka hui hong nung din huai mut kedi chi in huai agrep bang khat nak mo ma khak ki bua o ma
He was hiding from his enemies.
amel ma teu mu ding lawa ki bu mi ya hi.
And one thing that Gideon saw in himself was different than what God saw.
Gideon ama ki mu dan to pathian ki mu in amu dan kha akibang lawa o
He
ma
may have felt himself ashamed as God's messenger approached him.
pathian angelin ama avom in kha ama ading in kha zum wai asa abanga
Gideon didn't see himself as a great warrior.
ama kha gal hata anakingai tu ak tuai da nakimulo wai.
He's an insignificant man in an insignificant tribe within an insignificant family within an insignificant tribe.
Anam le nam neu pen hi huai bana ama le mi neu chika kimu huai bana huai sunga kha mi neu pen dana ama kimu wai.
His father was an idolater. He had idols.
Ama apa kha milim bia hiya milim nei pa ahi apa kha.
So when the man of God approached him, Gideon didn't see what God saw in him.
Puchin pathian angelin ama ahong mu in kha pathianin ama hin kwa amu pen kha ama akimu ke ya
And
hi.
if you continue in the story, we don't have time to read it all, but what happens is when the Lord comes and talks to him, Gideon doesn't believe that it is the Lord.
Ya ya atang tu isim man ke di ngai chia kha pathian angelina ahong mu takina Gideonin kha pathian akipana hi chi thelo na agi
And
takaya.
if you let me paraphrase it,
Puchina kohon gen di nga
he's saying, you're going to come and use me to save Israel?
ale nang Israel te hun khedi nga hum zat so mo.
He said, all of these stories that I've heard about God saving his people, they've just been stories.
Amana na gen tu pathianin ami Israel te anahon hia ahi chi thu kazap te te ka atak takamulo tang thu mai mai hi chi thu Gideonin.
Now, if you're like me, I used to think that everybody in the Bible, whether it's the Old Testament or New Testament, saw miracles all the time.
Ka et chiang ina kei na bat wai le tukun lui le tukun khak hitale pathian mi zat te teng teng kha thilam dang pi pi mu ding oma.
And here's Gideon saying, I heard about these stories about crossing the Red Sea. I heard about those stories, but I have never seen anything, and I don't know anybody that has ever seen a miracle.
Ai le ya Gideon ngai tu ana chu tui pi san akan kho kha atang thua da za ka hi himale ken kamita mulo bana wai mit ma ma anam kha mi le thelo.
So what Gideon saw in himself is a very sinful man participating in a shameful act, really hiding from the enemies.
Wai zeka Gideon ina kimu chu ama kha mi bang ma hilo mi hial khat mel ma te lawa ki bu a mi doi dalin akimu ai.
but God saw something different in him.
ที่มาเลยอามาปัทเทียนินทิลลำดังอาชิตวะ
He may have seen in him someone within his heart that was reaching out to help, reaching out to God in prayer.
ที่มาเลยอาลุงสิมปัทเทียนินเทียนิมันนี่นะปัทเทียนินะปัทเทียนงายอาสัมเทละกับอาลุงสิมองค์นี่ไม่เทีย
God calls him valiant, and he's about to make him so.
ปัทเทียนินมิหังสันอาเจียหุจินามิหังสันนินอหน
So we don't have time to go through the story, but you may remember the story of all of the evidence that Gideon was able to see that God was with him.
ยายาค่ะอาเวกิเดียนมันเกดิ้งอาหิมาเลยปัทเทียนินะอมปีอาหิค่ะกิเดียวนินอามิดมาหนมุตติไง
He put the fleece out on the ground, and remember one time the fleece was wet, the other time that the ground was wet.
หุจินะเวลาไว้มุลเตะข้าวไล่นะเก็นเจียงนะไว้เป็นห้องก็ที่เลยหุลเป็นก็เราหุจินห้องกิบุตรค่ะอาตามถอยถึงสาย
And then there finally was a time where Gideon said, "You're right, I have the faith."
หุจิอาหุนโตนักกิเดียวนี่นักเกนนักทุกเกนดิเอเวไว้ยิงหนำตาตะหิอาหุน
He blows a trumpet and he calls 32,000 soldiers to go fight the enemy.
หุจินะเป็นกุลหนมูตินะสิงถุมเละสังเมียมาเตดอกดินนี้เอาอันไก่
You find out later on in chapter 8 that there's 135,000 enemies.
ยายบุงยัดเยี่ยมเจียงนี่นะลักขันเลสิงถุมเละสังหนาม
Don't get into laps. I get all confused about the laps. So the enemy was 135,000. Gideon blew the trumpet and 32,000 came.
หุจินะไว้ลักขันเลสิงถุมเละสังหนาโดดีเตค่ะเป็นกุลหนมูเจียงนี่นะสิงถุมเละสังนี่จะไว้เตดอกดิน
But at this point, he had faith because of all the evidence that he asked for God to show him these different signs.
ที่มาเลยยายหุนตะนะครับว่าเทียนินอมปีดีอาหิจิไว้อัตตักตะกับเจ็ดนะครับอามันอามุเจียงตาย
And then we come to the second thing
หุจินะทีนี้นะยงจุงอา
that Gideon heard God say.
ปัทเทียนทุเกนเอาหนจะดีไง
In chapter 7, the first few verses,
บุงสกีอาต่างบุลละมา
he said, "You have too many people."
มีห่าวละหลายนาทีเอาไม่ใช่ปัทเทียน
So here's this man that had strengthened his faith, and he knew he was fighting this army that for years had destroyed the crops of Israel, and now God says, "You have way too many people."
ยายครับมีห่างสนองสวกตาอินเมลมาเตดาวดิ้งหงกิสาไว้ดงงำดิ้งหงกิสาไอเล็ปัทเทียนี่นะมีห่าวละหลายนาทีฮนจี
Now I did some math.
เมนส์ครับกันดีอ่ะ
32,000 for 135. Every one of Gideon's soldiers had to fight 4 soldiers.
ยายด้านข้าการคุเลสกับโบเจียงสิงถุงเละสังนิเตลักขันเละสิงถุงเละสังครับอากิโดปีดิจ่อเสไปขัดดิเดียนเสไปเต้นครับมีลีขัดที่น่าจะเตะ
But that didn't seem to faze Gideon because God was with him.
ที่มาเลยยายข้ากิเดียนลาวสักวันเดียวทุกประเทศองค์ยังไงจิตใจจังตายมัน
But God said he had to give faith.
ที่เละประเทศนี้เขามีห่าวละหลายนาทีฮนจีเซน
So of course, as you remember the story, God said all of those that want to go home can go. And so 22,000 left.
ผู้จีน่าปัทเทียนี่นะยายดงงำรอดโดยลงอไปกุกีกุเต็งไปกิกสกินจินสิงนี่เละสังนี่ค่ะลาวกีกุฮิลาย
So now it's 10,000 to 135,000. There's 10,000 people to so many lakhs.
ที่ว่าเขาไว้ลักขัดบาลมีตามปีเตค่ะสิงขัดตะวินโดดิจิตอล
Okay, you want to know the ratio?
อาเรซิโอค่ะยาอากิโดดิซาวนาเทวตุยาเลย
That's one of Gideon's soldiers with every 13 and a half.
ผู้เจ้ากิเดียนเสไปเตมีขัดินค่ะมีส่วนเลถุงเล็กกิมอาจะอุงาน
I don't know about you, but if I saw a half of a soldier running towards me, I think that would be more ferocious than one. I don't know if that's going to translate.
อยู่ไว้เตเต็งครับคนไหนอยากกินดอกดีบ้างฮิเลวครับไว้ส่งเลยถุงเล็กกิมเตะครับกี่คนไหนฮิเลวทุกข้างในตัวนะครับมีขัดสร้างอาหารสวยหินดีไว้
Maybe Gideon.
สิ่งดีไหม
He still said you had too many.
พี่เลยเล็บปัดเทียนคำนี้ห่าวละหลายนะฮิจิ
And as we know the story, it went down to 300 against 135,000.
ไว้บางนะครับปัดเทียนมีห่าวละหลายนะฮิจิเจียงอ่ะกะมีจะถึงครับไว้ลักคันเลสิ่งถูกเลสามหนาดงเดียวปัดเทียนนนเกียเทียอาตามไปเป็นสาม
That's 450 soldiers.
ไว้เสียคำนี้ขัดอินครับจะลีเละส่งอ่ะอากิโดปิดง่ายไม่ใหญ่จังครับ
God had told him, I want to do this so that you'll make sure that you didn't have the glory.
ไอ้เลยปัดเทียนนี่ใหญ่ก็หินนะเสียค่ะใหญ่กาโซนักเปลี่ยนค่ะนู่นหาหน้าอาโซนักกิสักวันนักกิปะตัวลูกนั่นยิ่งก็จะเสียไอ้
It wasn't you, Gideon, that's going to, with all of your military might and all of your strategies, that's going to be able to fight this enemy. It is God.
ใหญ่นะมีมาเทียบกับกี่เดียวนั่งเสียเลยนะเสไปหานะเสียก็น่าโซที่เราจริงปัดเทียนเสียกันจริงนะเทบุตรกัน
But I cannot imagine that there would be any danger, even with 32,000, that Gideon would have thought that.
ที่มาเลยมีไงตัวนะคะสิ่งถุมและสังอินโดเลี้ยงเลี้ยงไว้ที่ทรงเดียกินตาไว้ที่เรา
So in chapter 7 and verses 8 through 12, now we see that God is ready for his soldiers to go out and fight the enemy.
วิจินาบุงสกีต่างแยกดักกิฟันโซมเลยนี่อีสิหมายเลยใหญ่เดียครับอเมริมาเตียวโดดิ้งน้องเกษ
So he tells Gideon, it is time to charge. Blow your trumpets and let's go.
วิจิอาปัจจัยนักเรียนจุดนับเป็นกุลมุติลันกาโดตันิช
300 soldiers against 135.
มีจัตุวินาลักขันเลสิงถุมเลสังอาโดยองกิสตา
And then he heard the third thing that God said.
อาทุ่มนาดิ้งอ่ะปัจจัยทุกเย็นใหญ่หุ่นอ่ะหุ่นจะนอนดิ้งอ่ะ
And I will say, this is some of my favorite words of God to his soldiers.
ใหญ่ครับปัจจัยเสไปเตละกาอาทุ่มลกระเดมาขัตหิยา
After he said, arise and go down, I have delivered them into your hands.
ทูเขียอิลานกวานินอามาเตนะกุตาหุ่นเปขิตากันยันเชีย
Verse 10 says,
ต่างโซมา
but if you are afraid,
ที่มาเลยนั่นเราหลายหินเล่นั่นเราไว้หินเล่
take your servant with you and go down into the camp to strengthen your faith.
นาสิกาปีลันไปสุกิลันนักินนาสุหาตินัจยา
God didn't say, if you are afraid, then let's call all this off.
ปัจจัยนี้นะนั่นเราไว้เลยยัยกิโดนาเป็นกิโดสักดาไม้นี่อาจิเกีย
He didn't say, if you're afraid, then let's wait for another 3 weeks.
ตัวนั่นเราหลายอะไรกล่าวถึงของอิงหักเสกหลายนี่อาจิเกียปัจจัย
He said, if you're afraid, then you need to go somewhere so that you can strengthen your faith and do what I told you to do.
ไว้จะปัจจัยนักเรียนหนกจุดนั่นเราไอ้เลยมือขัดไปเชียร์นักกินนายหิาติละกัจจิบังไอ้
I have delivered this enemy into your hands.
ยัยนาเมียมาเตียวครับนักขุดานไปขินตา
But if you are afraid, go somewhere to get yourself strengthened.
ไว้เสียกันนั่นเราไอ้เลยก็มันเนี่ยมาไปแล้วนักกินนาหักสักทีอาจารย์
We know the story.
อาตามทุยเทกสาเห
The 300 soldiers rushed, they made noise, they crashed their pots, and all of the 135,000 soldiers of the enemy were killed.
อาตามทุยเทกสาเหมีจะถุงเต็มเป็นกุลเต็มมูตินาหงเดลวาวิจินาลักทางเดสิงถุงเดสังอ่ะเตจนเดลจากินอาหงจงไอ้
So I want to make an application of each of those things very quickly to our lives.
ยัยถุงเดค่ะอินหัวอิจังเทกนาดีงินะอากินตะกินคนเงินจวนดีงะ
The first thing was that God saw something in Gideon that he didn't see in himself.
อามาสัพเพนะอีเกนนวมจูกิเดียนินอามากิมูปัจจัยนิอามัวอามุอีเกนนวม
What a great application for us as Christians.
คริสเตียนอีนะอีจินเทอทุปีมาโอมาฮี
Maybe it's just the American congregations,
ไอ้เกลอเมริกาคองเกรชันเตอาดิเจ้าหิมายเท
but the American congregations are full of people that do not feel the responsibility to work.
ที่มาเลยอเมริกาสับจวมเตะค่ะอ่ะหมกพวกหนาเซมโซโลมีตั้งเปียวไง
And when they see these scriptures of action and these scriptures of responsibilities, it has to be for somebody else, not me.
ว่าไอ้เสียก็ย้ายใบบุละหมกพวกหนาที่เกณฑ์เตะค่ะอ่ะหมกเจ้าว่าแกก็แกหีดีเราว่ายับขัดที่โน่นนี่ไหนเตะจี้ไงดังสิมันนี่ไว้
It's all of those people that seem to do the work of the church. They ought to be listening to these scriptures, not me.
ว่าไอ้เสียก็ค่ะย้ายปัทยันทูน่ะเซมเตะเตะกินขยายใบบุเกณฑ์เตะอ่ะไงดีไว้แกยังไงเขียนดีเรา
But God has called all of us.
ที่มาเลยปัทยันนี่อีเวกเอา
Every member within a local congregation has a responsibility.
ว่าไอ้เสียกินตัวสูงสับตัวมาเมมเบอร์เตะกินหมกพวกนั่นเองเจ้าที่
And when you are baptized into Christ and put on Christ, you're in a new walk and a relationship with God.
ผู้เชี่ยวบัพติศมาตั้งแต่คริสต์อีกบุยโคมเจียงนี่นะหินด่านทักกะหินนี่นะหมกพวกนั่นเอง
You are called by God in some scripture that refers to that.
ไบเบิลต่างดังไอ้หมู่บางนี่นะปัทยันสับหินจิเกตอย่างนี้
So God is calling you valiant.
ว่าไอ้เสียปัทยันนี่ค่ะกาลหาทนเจีย
God sees something in you that a lot of times you don't see in yourself.
ว่าไอ้เสียกันนังนั่นยิ่งกว่าน้ำหมู่ปัทยันนี่อ้ำอมยีเกีย
Some say I cannot teach and I cannot preach.
เห็นขัดเต้นทุกเกละเสียมโลยงะมีละหินเสียมโลไหมจิไม่เท
There is so much work within a local congregation.
ตัวสูงสับตัวมาอีเทดังนักตำลมาไอ้
And if we think that the only things to do or that God notices are the things that are seen throughout our worship service, then you have misunderstood your Christian walk.
ว่าไอ้เสียกับปัทยันนี่อ้ำเป็นเบียนาอิทิลิเต็งเจ้ามุดานะอีไงตัวไอ้เลยคริสเตียนเต็มนิรันดร์กัน
Each person that is baptized into Christ and is called into Christ has a huge responsibility to Christ and to their fellow Christians.
ว่าไอ้เสียกับมิมัลเต็งนี่นะเยซูคริสต์อาสาปาไว้หดดำนั่นเองเต็นครับตัวสูงสับตัวเลยมิมัลกับคริสเตียนเต็มตัวมุกว่านั่นอย่างปีไหนฮิจิกิเทนมาได้
What does God see in you?
ปัทยันนี่นะนังบังอา
What do you see in yourself?
ไอ้เกลนังบังจินนักกิน
He calls you valiant.
ปัทยันนี่นะมีหาทางสมุทรไอ้
We need to show God we are.
ว่าไอ้เสียกับปัทยันครับ
Sometimes we look at the second thing that Gideon heard is you have too many people.
เข็นเจียงอ่ะครับดิเดียวอินอามุจูปัทยันอามุจูมีหาวแล้วหลายในอาจิค่ะไอ้ยา
That is a great excuse.
ไอ้ครับส่วนลำห้อยตะไคร้
We can find all kinds of excuses that sound a lot like this that will excuse us from work within the church.
ยายาส่วนลำเทอิมุบะบังเงินะปัทยันน่ะเสพนะขมิ้นเทส่วนลำเทกิโลตักตะเคียนจบกี่บังอีโบเทตัมมาไอ้
Most of us probably will not be fighting the Midianites.
ไอ้เตะเต็งๆครับมีเดียนเตะอิสวาเวกเซนเกยิงอ่ะ
Most of us will probably be not in a army that's fighting 450 people to one of ourselves.
ไอ้เกลเอ็นมีครับจันลีเล่ส่งอ่ะอีโดคนเคยไม่เท
But we have a lot of responsibilities that seem too difficult for us to handle.
ที่มาเล่อินขวาค่ะอีโดลกดีอีไงตัวตั้งปีอิมุมทำไมเทีย
God has told us that we have already won the battle.
ที่มาเลยปัทยันนี่ครับกาโซตายโยเจ
We have a glorious heaven of gold that is waiting for us.
อาวอลโซอีตุนเทคนาดีวานกับมาบ้านอีตุนนาดีเนี่ย
If you are baptized into Christ, you have that.
วิเชียคริสต์บัพติศมาอีตั้งเลยไว้บานกับวอลโซนะอีตุนเทคนาดีเนี่ยคิดได้
If you continue to work towards that.
ไว้ตุงดีนะอีปันหนักไอ้
The last thing is he heard God say, if you are afraid, then go somewhere to strengthen your faith.
อาทุ่มนาปัทยันทุกเกณฑ์จับตุนั่นหลับหลายอันนี้ก็มุนีมักไปแล้วนะกินไหนครับอาจารย์
Those of us who are parents, we all understand this this responsibility and trying to teach your children this concept.
Hiai to ki sai kha nu le pa ta nei ten kha hiai dan kha I thek na tam ma hi nga.
There's too many times as Christian parents, we don't challenge our children to do what is right.
Hun tam pia Christian nu le pa ten kha I ta te kha thil hoi hi nga. Ki sim sak kha lo.
When we see them in a difficult time, we want to go and rescue them.
Puchia I ta ten hak sat na ya hon thuak jek chiang wa kha mo ki hun ke.
We don't want to have them have the difficulties that we have fought.
En I thuak hak sat na hon thuak diu kha ti ngai no we.
But what we should be teaching them,
Di ma le I hil ding tu
if you're afraid,
na la wa hi le
it's okay.
mi ngi cha thil hi thei ma hi.
I'm afraid.
Ke le lao sek ka hi.
I give an example real quick. When Brother Harold first time came to India in the mid-70s,
Khat ka hon example ko la zel di nga unaw pa heral ka sang khat ja wa som sa ki ma India hong pai ma sakina
he took his whole family to Allahabad.
a in kwan te teng teng kha Allahabad apia
All Ed saw was this brochure of India.
aman in etinamu et heralinamu jo dia ya India tem pai ko
And he took his whole family over there.
aman kha in kwan pi te hai Allahabad
And
apia
it wasn't exactly like the brochure explained.
ai le waya ko pi to ke sai alaya amu chawahia wai ma bang abu
But a few years later, a few years ago, my wife Liz asked him, Daddy, were you afraid when you went the first time?
Puchina kazin kha apa kianga anadot tu kuaya na mo pai tungin na lao hia chebe amana mun the lo cha abro sa cha wa mo chama
He said, No, I was stupid.
ile aman tu lao lo nga hai lo tel ka hi chi ka ki thei chi
If you knew Brother Harold, that meant he was afraid.
wai chu keral the ka ten kha wai chi chu lao hi chi nai chi thei ge nga
But the point is we can be afraid in a lot of things that we sign up to do or that we know that we should do.
hun dam zua kha ingai to na kha thil hi ding a I chi te kha I zo ding hi kha ki sa hai ki sa
And we need to teach our children that you need to do what is right no matter how afraid you are.
wai zia ka ita te kha thil hoi isin saka athua ku I det ngam ke le wai thil hoi na isin sak
But just like God told Gideon before he told him to charge, he said, if you're afraid, go somewhere to strengthen that faith.
Kia ya patianin Gideon kia nga again bang na lawale ko yung niya mapay siya na naging nai.
Go somewhere to where you can understand that this is the right thing and that I am with you.
Wai siya kapatian again chukoy mun hiya mapay lan hiya ka na hiding kil di kahi ken honong di kahi ithe siyam na di nga pay siya ta po ai.
We don't tell our children that if you're afraid, then you just don't do it.
Itate ka na lawale hida main kichimok laway chu.
We tell them to continue to charge, but get back, and I'll help you build your faith so that you'll know that you'll be able to continue to work.
Wai siya itate chu hon hi zomilan pan nahi nagin na nangadi nga hoi zo hi kenon pan di kahi chi ihan ho to se ai.
So Gideon's faith was continued to grow.
Uchi na Gideon gina chu ahong kham ha ki ai.
But something changed him from the time that he was hiding in a wine press until he actually executed the leaders of the Amalekites.
Ya ahin huwa elen khamel mate lawa aki bukna aki pada kha amel mate heu tu te mana atha tana ka bangya min ahin huwa ke kai
What that change was
wai ahin huwa ke tu
the Word of God.
pathian thuai
Was God speaking to him
pathianin akianga athu
and
ge
strengthening himself with those around him.
wai pathian thu ge te na ama na akima kianga te asu ha nai
Gideon did not win the battle
Gideon in kha wai ka zo lo wai
with him just by himself.
ama chawa azu hi wai
He was with 300 other people.
midang kya hi lo na mi za tu to azo
The scriptures don't explain it, but I can't imagine that they were just as afraid as he was.
Why me that to ama kianga tele lai siam go to again kina ama bang bang lao thâu ding like
So what about you today?
tu ni na nang le ke bang chia de tu ni na
What does God see in you?
but here din na hin kwa bang amua
What do you see in yourself?
nang le nang bang chin na kim
And the challenges that you have may seem too great, but understand God is with you.
Khen chiang kha koi mo ta mi tu pi ta ka kim hak sa hi ma le but here no no
And if you're afraid, you're like every other Christian.
mu chia wai mo kwa na te sem so de na la wai le Christian dang te le nang bang ba hai
That's the value, one of the great values of a local church. Strengthen yourself and then do what's right.
ya kha tua sum sak tua a poi mo na kha le khat ki ha ka wa ya hey
You said the pictures suggest I was last year in 2018. I think my first time with you was 2014 at this congregation, a different place. And I have reasons to have not traveled to India this year. And I don't think anybody would challenge those reasons. But I talked with my wife about it, and she said, you need to go. She said, it is good for you to go, and it is good for the brethren to go. And so I'm here for the encouragement that it gives me to see you. I am here for the encouragement that maybe a little bit I can give to the brethren over here to know that there are people across the world of like precious faith. And I'm here so that my people can see that you can go and work and do good things in the kingdom, even if you're not a preacher or a son of a preacher. And so heeding your admonition to not talk too long, this is going to be scary. I'm just going to say a few words from Paul, because he's short, right? He speaks very short, right? The admonition that I would leave with you is what my prayer is for all of you and all of the American brethren that are here, and myself and my family and my brethren back home. And it's what Paul says in Colossians, the first chapter. Starting in verse 9, he says, for this cause, since the day we heard of it, we do not cease to pray and make requests for you. And so here's what my request for you is: that you be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, to walk worthily of the Lord unto all pleasing and bearing fruit. And I can't not say a little more about that. The apostle says that we walk worthily of the Lord unto all pleasing. That is possible if we put our minds to it, not because we are perfect, but because he is. And that if we do that, we can bear fruit in every good work. And even though he already said that the prayer is that you be filled with knowledge, he then says, increasing in the knowledge of God. The more you learn, the more you can be filled, the bigger your cup becomes to receive the knowledge of him. And the prayer goes on that you be strengthened with all power according to the might of his glory. And if you sit and you contemplate verse 11 for a while, it actually reads that you be empowered with all power according to his power of his glory. And that's the apostle just driving the point home. Unto all patience, long suffering, with joy, giving thanks to the Father who made us enabled to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light, and that is who we all are, enabled by Him to be partakers in His precious blessings that none of us deserve. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to see people of faith around the world. You're an encouragement to me. I will return and tell my family. You will be an encouragement to them. I don't know if anything I said to anybody this week has helped anyone, but you've been an encouragement to me, and I thank you for that. And I will do my best to be short, and I will leave it there, brother. Thank you. That's my prayer.